guest today is a lifelong advocate for the education and effort to stop human trafficking in its many obvious and also hidden ways. This is an issue that is far more prevalent than most can imagine, and the road to discovery and recovery is long, but there are many people helping along the way. If you'd like to get information or dedicate your time, please check the episode notes below for some links. Here's my friend, Janna Piper. Janna, what is your relationship with the topic of sex trafficking or human trafficking or both?
Well, my general focus is mostly on domestic minor sex trafficking. I've known about that since I was 14 years old, so 1993. But human trafficking in general is just a horrible thing, and we should end modern slavery, and everybody should be concerned about it. And that's kind of my opinions on that.
How did you get into it 14 years old?
So I went to Tualatin Valley Junior Academy. I think it's just Tualatin Valley Academy now. It's a small Seventh-day Adventist elementary school, K through 10, out in Hillsborough. When I was 14, we got word that a girl who was a former student there had been murdered, and they had assumed that she was murdered by her pimp because she had been being trafficked and she wanted to get out, and so he slit her throat. She was only 16 at the time. She had been in my oldest brother's class. He knew her personally. Her younger brother was still a student at the school. He was in the 6th grade. And so I actually just not only, obviously that had a huge impact on me for remembering it from, 30 years ago, to even witnessing how it affected her brother and her mom, because her mom was a single mom, and she would come in to pick up her son from school, and I would see them. So I could see the actual effect of it in their personas and their faces, and even him as a kid. He was a sweet kid, but he was just a troublemaker, so he was getting in trouble all the time too after that.
So your school, you said a preparatory school?
Private school.
Private school.
Private Seventh-day Adventist, yeah.
Okay, so a religious school.
Yes.
Okay. And this young girl went there until she was 15 or 16 and then left and got involved?
So, that's one of the ways that, most likely her pimp was what we would refer to as a Romeo pimp. He was, her boyfriend. And is one of the ways that they do target vulnerable individuals, and one of them would be a child of a single mother, so no father in a presence, and they weren't well off either, so they were struggling financially or something like that. She was missing that love and attention that she would normally get from a father in her life. Most likely he exploited that, started dating her, and then used that as a way to get her to start doing sex work.
So this happened while she was going to school there. She decided to drop out, I imagine, or she continued to go? It varies between,
I don't know exactly. I didn't know her at all before this story came out, before we learned that she had been murdered. My brother knew her and I think they had been in the same class like a year or 2 years before that. So I don't know how many years she was at the school, what years or anything along those lines. I just knew that she was a former student. Her brother was still a student. But how Romeo pimps operate is they start dating their target, their victim, and then basically selling them a whole future of them being together and all this fun stuff. It's like, oh, but we need to finance it. And that's when he would say, well, in order to finance it, you need to start having sex with my friends. And then it would progress from there. And a lot of times they keep up pretenses, as in the victim will still be going to school and then be forced to do sex work in the evenings. But a lot of times in these instances, the girls do drop out of school. And when you're in a single parent household, it's a lot more difficult for the parents to keep track of what their kids are doing all the time. So it's a lot easier for that. I don't know if she left the school, went to another school, because again, they weren't, a rich family. There were scholarships for people who were needing it to attend the school, but again, cost wise, I know a couple of my other friends who would go to that school for a while had to leave and go to a public school just because of the cost. So that could have been the case too. I don't know that part of the story.
Yeah, I just find it interesting that it was a private religious school. That just doesn't seem likely.
It doesn't, but that's one of the things that that I want to also emphasize in this. There's even, some groups call it in our own backyard. If it directly affected me, basically a relatively small town, white Seventh-day Adventist Christian girl, it can happen in your neighborhood. Mm-hmm. It happens everywhere. It's all over the Portland area. I mean, like, Portland has the largest commercial sex industry per cap in the United States, and not coincidentally, has the second highest rate of child sex trafficking in the United States. Because when there's that high of a demand, then there isn't enough legitimate supply to provide it without traffickers, these sociopaths, to then force individuals into the industry just for them to make money. Because they know they can. The demand is there.
So you were going to school there. You were 14 years old. This stuff happened. You didn't really know who she was. You went about the rest of your life. And how many years later did you decide that you wanted to focus on this and make it an important part of what you were trying to accomplish?
Oh, we aren't done with my childhood yet.
Oh, let's keep going then.
Yeah. So I started pet sitting when I was 15 years old, when my very second client lived on Northwest 18th and Everett. The first time I went to go work there, my dad just dropped me off in the evening, didn't have any food with me, so he just gave me money. It's like, oh, well, go up to Fred Meyer's and get yourself whatever food you want tomorrow. Now, West Burnside doesn't look anything at all today like it did back in 1994. There weren't all of these, high-end apartments or, trendy brunch spots or any, the hip hangouts or any kind of, these chic boutiques that are out there now. It was just seedy hotels and bars. So the next morning, I walk up Burnside to go find the Fred Meyer, and this balding, middle-aged man in a black Hyundai drives past me, turns around. Drives past me again, turns around, drives past me again, turns into this parking lot where I was just about to walk through. And I'm just praying, please let me get past this. Please let me get past this. Because my mind is thinking he's wanting something from me, and I'm thinking kidnap. Well, I did get past it. So when he came back out to Burnside, he turned back west to pass me again, turned around, passed me again. This time I looked at him. We made eye contact, and he was motioning with his head for me to go over to him. And I'm like, fuck. At this point, I'm like, I missed where Fred Meyer was completely. It's a big building even back then, big old sign. I'm like, okay, I passed it. I don't know where it is. So I go up to this Chevron on 23rd to ask for directions for Fred Meyer's. And after that, I didn't see the guy anymore. I think he thought I was probably going to report, hey, this guy's following me and being creepy. And, but knowing what I know now about how it works, he definitely was most likely wanting to purchase me. And I don't look how old I look now. I'm I've always looked younger than I really am. But just to give an idea of how young I looked at 15, when I was 19 and in college, a few days before my 19th birthday, I was getting carted going into rated R movies and was stopped by a policeman while I was on my way to work because he mistook me for a middle schooler. So there was no way this guy thought I was even 15, let alone a consenting adult that he was wanting to.
So at that time in Portland in 1994, people in that criminal enterprise would drive around and see young girls walking by themselves and attempt to recruit them.
I think he was most likely a John and wanted to purchase me.
So he thought you were working.
Yes.
I see.
Because I'm it's as the doctor mentioned in your interview with him, 82nd is notorious for that, especially back in there, where the Johns would just drive up and down the street looking for anybody, any girl or woman who looked like they were a streetwalker to purchase. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't 15-year-olds back in the 90s did not dress at all provocatively or anything. I was just normal, shorts and a t-shirt or whatever it was, jeans and a t-shirt. But I was still walking alone on not a common street where young girls just walk alone.
Yeah, it's kind of a bummer you can't just walk around anymore. I mean, for the longest time, you could really kind of go anywhere and do anything you wanted. But now, I don't know, I guess over time, as more negative things happened and parents got more concerned, then we're at a point now where you kind of don't even let your kids go anywhere alone, even if they got cell phones, because you're kind of worried about them because of situations like what you're talking about.
Oh yeah, the irony is crime levels has actually dropped significantly. And now that, it's more of parents' fear than about their kids being left alone. In the 80s and 90s, kids were playing alone out in the streets all the time. But the crime rate was higher back then. So it was more along the lines of this information age that parents know what could happen and they want to prevent it. One more thing happened when I was at about the same age. I went up to Victoria to spend a week with my grandparents, and I was reading the Canadian Reader's Digest, and there was an article in that digest about the Romeo pimp and how he operated. And so that's where I really got to understand a little bit more about prostitution, and that there's quite a few prostitutes who are children, and they don't actually choose to work in the life. But at the time, there wasn't anything that the internet hadn't existed yet, hadn't been invented yet, or wasn't
as widespread,
available to the consumer yet. I remember when AOL became a thing. That was a few years after this. That dial-up, gotta love it. And so I just went back to back to my life. It was always in the back of my head. Went to college, came back here. In 2009, I think it was, I joined a business networking group, because that's when I started really focusing on my pesting as a business and not a side thing. One of the other business owners I met was a hairdresser, and I went to go visit her business, because that's one of the things that we did. We go visit other people's businesses to find out about them, and then we do a little commercial for them in our networking meeting. And in that meeting, she mentioned that her daughter worked a lot in, ending sex trafficking, and had done, documentaries about it. And so that was that all those memories from my childhood just kind of came back to the forefront. I'm like, ooh, I can actually research this now. The internet's available. I can go, what is sex trafficking? How does it all work? And that was when it was first oh yeah, sex trafficking isn't just prostitution. Sex trafficking happens in all areas of the commercial sex industry, from stripping to porn to live sex shows and the standard, prostitution. And that's also when I was starting to learn about how Portland operated. It has the largest commercial sex industry per cap and the second highest rate of child sex trafficking. And then, I was trying to find ways that I could work in it to end it. But my personality and my schedule doesn't really allow for me to work directly with survivors. I'm a little bit too blunt. For me, recovering from my own trauma, actually being told exactly what happened. This really did happen to you. That helped me clarify and get, solidified and helped me in my healing. But not a whole lot of people are just able to accept the truth and just go, oh, okay, now everything makes sense. Is more a lot of the times when they learn, oh, no, he's not your boyfriend. He's your pimp. He's trafficking you. A lot of victim survivors will shut down and then start, instead of having clarity, go, oh, yeah, this is something that happened to me. It's not my fault. A lot of people was oh, well, it's, when it comes to trauma-informed, most people do not respond to that blunt truth as a healing mechanism. Instead, a lot of times it can trigger them. So,
well, that is an insanely traumatic event or series of events that could break a lot of people. And the older I get and the more I learn and the more I understand about myself and how lucky I am in a lot of ways that I didn't have like some major significant traumatic event. When you view other people that have had any life that is just devastating, I don't know. I really can't understand how difficult it would be to come out of that. And it's a lifelong thing. You have people who experience something in their childhood that maybe never get over it. It's like a constant battle. You're always dealing with it. And I think it's really just a matter of each individual and what they're willing to do with it. But to go through something like that where someone owns you and someone's in charge of you and someone dictates who has sex with you, that's some crazy stuff.
Yeah.
For anybody to deal with. And if you put it on a kid, kids can barely, I mean, your brain isn't fully developed until you're 25. And if you've been brainwashed into believing that this person is your guardian or your savior or is responsible for you, and they're giving you money and they're allowing you the opportunity to have any sort of freedom, like you develop a different relationship with them than you should. It's unbalanced. And then if you finally figure out how to break away from that, everything could just be so messed up when you try to like reconfigure the pathways and everything.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that a lot of survivors who have been willing to tell their story have mentioned. Like even while it's happening, they've had out of body experiences, whereas like it's not really happening to them. They disassociate. Some of them even mentioned like they felt themselves like floating above the instance and just like, watching them in the act. And then as children, they don't have a lot of them. They don't know how to actually. Like they lost the opportunity to learn or be educated in the normal way. They don't have a lot of the development that happens in your childhood. It stops. I remember back when Dr. Drew wasn't crazy, and he in 94.7 actually had his show late in the evening.
Yeah,
and that was also before Adam Carolla went crazy too. And one of the things that he would mention whenever somebody it was predominantly women who would call up into the show and sound like little children. He would automatically go, something happened in your childhood. Some traumatic thing happened in your childhood that stunted your growth. And that's why, like even in their vocalizations, they didn't sound like adults. And so, and then a lot of these victim survivors, when the standard way of the people who are trapped into this life, they're manipulated and coerced into it. They aren't like outright kidnapped and then forced to do it. So a lot of them, they don't even realize that they are being trafficked. They don't know it. And so it's one of the things like telling them directly, no, that's not what love is. That he doesn't love you. He's trafficking you. Like this is evil, this is evil. This is criminal. A lot of times since it hasn't been like slowly, instead of like slowly unraveling the lies, it's just like taking a shotgun blast to it. And that can be just as traumatic as the other events itself, having their whole worldview destroyed. Mm-hmm. So, that worked for me, but for most people, is adding trauma on top of the trauma.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of times, sometimes it can be more traumatic to accept that something bad is happening than just to go with it.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, you become accustomed to living a certain way and you find comfort in it, no matter how shitty it is.
It's what you know.
Yeah.
People, like a lot of people are just terrified of change or anything different. So if it's if you that's why if you grow up in an abusive household, your vulnerability to being trafficked is significantly higher. If you were sexually abused as a child, your vulnerability is higher. Mm-hmm. And even if you're in the foster system, that's another vulnerability marker that you will be targeted by a trafficker to manipulate. all of those things. Like if it feels like if you're the only way that the people who are supposed to love you show you love is through violence, then you think that violence is love.
Yeah.
Especially when it happens when your brain is developing.
Well, and I imagine a lot of those younger people don't even really know what sex is. And then all of a sudden this thing is happening and they're like, this is different from, because sex is different from everything else. Yeah. And if you have somebody controlling whether or not that's going to happen, God, that's got to be so weird.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you decided that this was going to become a focus of your life, and you said that you don't work directly with the victims?
Correct. Because again, my personality doesn't allow for me to. I tend to just say what things are, and again, that's not exactly what trauma informed is.
You're too blunt with them? Yeah.
I'm just too blunt and direct with everybody.
Okay.
I'm not a fan of euphemisms. I'm just not. And then also with as being a professional pet sitter, my schedule is always in flux and always all over the place. And if you're going to work directly with survivors, it's not always that you need to be available on like a dime's notice, but you do need to be available for them. And for me, I'm just kind of like, doop, doop, like a little hummingbird. Doop, 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 doop. And I was trying to find a way that I could help in some way. I did find out that, RAINN, Tori Amos's nonprofit RAINN, the Rape and Incest National Network, were offering, they have, phone hotlines, and there's also like the sexual assault hotline where people can be operators. Well, they were starting to have an online option for that. I'm like, oh, I can do that because then I can just, I can be at home and doing my own, working on my business stuff and then have like a chat box open. So if somebody needs to chat, I can, put my work stuff aside without having to actually physically go anywhere. But obviously you had to be trained in order to do that. And there was only like one training center in Oregon, and it was located in Bend. I'm like, well, shit, I need to figure out how I can get to Bend. But then I called them and they had no idea what I was talking about. So I'm like, okay, fuck, that's not going to work. And then fate would have it. I mean, this accident did fuck up my entire life, but I was rear-ended in 2012. And so then I ended up having to go into physical therapy. I went to physical therapy at ADAPT training, and my physical therapist was Amanda, and she at the time was a member of the Junior League of Portland and in their Stop Human Trafficking Committee. She brought the Delicates Drive to ADAPT, and like, oh, yeah, this is something that I wanted to be into and doing and working on. And then while I was still her patient, the Junior League released their documentary about domestic minor sex trafficking in Portland called Waiting for the Light. And it was premiered at Mission Theater in downtown Portland. There was a panel discussion of experts who had appeared in the documentary. There was an FBI agent, a prosecutor, and a couple of other like police officers and other people involved in it. And Amanda was the moderator. So my mom and I went, and that's when I learned about the Junior League. I'm like, oh, this is perfect, because they don't work directly with survivors. They work in a supportive manner to the organizations who do work directly with survivors.
So who works directly with the survivors?
There are a few organizations in Portland that I do know of. I'm sure that there are more. Rose Haven, they are a day shelter for homeless women. And so a lot of homeless women are vulnerable to being trafficked and have been trafficked. There's also Rahab Sisters. They work directly with survivors out on the east side, in like Mount Tabor area, I think. And then there's New Avenues for Youth. They work a lot with foster children. So, foster children are high vulnerability rate for human trafficking. So there's a lot of sex trafficking survivors who they're working to support and having like I think it's finished constructing, but kind of a home for them to get out of being homeless and have a place for them to stay and get their lives stable again. A Village for One has the same thing. They're out in like the Clackamas area. They have a home for survivors to live in so they can get off the street and they also have like in counseling there too. So they get the counseling, they get all the services and resources that they need so that they can process the trauma. And
it's got to be so brutal being a foster parent, because you're either a really good person who's trying to make a difference or like some creepy, weird piece of shit. And I don't know how you filter those people out and how you figure out who's who, but when you hear, and maybe this is just my brain being biased, but like when you hear the term foster kid or foster parent, you just think broken youth who's in a house with 10 other kids. And there's got to be good people that are trying to help them out and do things. But then you have situations like what you're talking about where that's like a red flag for trafficking.
Well, I mean, the part of like, a foster child who is a foster child because there was trauma in their childhood home. Unfortunately, the foster system tends to take children away from, Black families and Indigenous families a lot more often than from white families. That one minor thing will go wrong in a Black family and they'll take the children away, but they'll wait for like years of abuse in a white home before they take those children away.
Well, do you know what necessitates the taking away of a child? Like, what does it take? What do you have to do as a parent to get the foster system to take your kid away?
Abuse, neglect, I think are the big ones. I know that in Black families, though, like there was one time where a single mother needed to go for, this wasn't in the Portland area, I think it was like in Texas or something like that. A Black mother, single mother, had a job interview, but she couldn't afford daycare or, anyone to babysit her child. So she brought her child with her. The kid was sitting in the car waiting for her. Police were notified. And just from that one instance, they took the child. But then we also have the instance where these I forget the family name, it's a huge Portland scandal happened. Like the family lived up in like Vancouver, but a lot of the bullshit happened in Oregon. These two white lesbian women adopted several Black children, and they were part of the foster system. They had been removed from their parents in the foster system, and then they adopted them. But they were starving the kids. They were abusing the kids. They were using them as props. And then when the law was finally, and this happened for years and years and years, even like the neighbors were reporting and say like, something's weird's going on over in that house. The children are way too small. They were posting racist pictures of them online, and they were getting accolades. Oh, you're such good white people taking care of these, childless parentless kids. And then it culminated with them driving their minivan off a cliff. And you remember? Yeah.
I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. And so there was evidence that these women were abusing their adopted children, and yet the authorities didn't do anything about it. But generally speaking, for a child to go into the foster system is because the parents were either neglecting them or abusing them in some form or another. It's just skewed to give the benefit of the doubt to white parents versus the benefit of the doubt to Black parents. So that's another aspect where in human trafficking and sex trafficking, if you are not white, that's automatically a vulnerability point for someone to target you for trafficking.
You're saying people of color get trafficked more than white people?
Yes.
Really?
Yeah. So I'm pretty sure it was the doctor's research. The PSU did a study on sex trafficking, child sex trafficking here in Portland in 2012. And the report notes I think the Black population in Portland is somewhere around like 2%. But out of the survivors that they interviewed for this study, it was like 30% of the victims were Black. So, I mean, they're definitely targeted. And in one of the Junior League's awareness events back in 2021, when it was virtual, the survivors that were interviewed were two Black women. And part of the reason why they ended up them being more vulnerable to it was because a lot of, Black children are, I forget what the term is, but they are treated as adults even when they're children. So, like a 12-year-old Black girl will be more sexualized or treated as, when they're punished, they're punished more as if they were like an adult and should know better than a white kid. And so they are suspended from school or expelled from school at a higher rate than white children are. And so if you don't have a place to go during the day, you're just out in the streets or you're out playing in the playground or whatever, that's another access point for a trafficker.
Do you think it's related to race, though, or do you think it's related to level of income? It seems like...
Well, when you're talking about level of income, that's also related to race. If you look at the wealth factor, the generational wealth of Black families is like around $10,000. The average wealth of Black families is around $10,000. The average wealth of a white family is like $100,000. So if you're even... and yeah, income has to do with it, because if you don't have the resources to provide for your family, someone else, and kids understand the struggle. Like okay, I love comedy, love stand-up comedy. A lot of comics who grew up poor, they will talk about how when they were struggling, they understood the struggle. They know that their parents are struggling. I knew my parents were struggling when both my parents were laid off at the same time. I knew that they didn't have as much money as they would like or wanted to be able to afford some of the things for us kids. So I gave up some things that I knew that cost money because I knew that my parents were struggling with money. I mean, I gave up taking piano lessons. I gave up taking gymnastics. I gave up a lot of things because I knew that my parents couldn't really afford it. And the same thing that will happen with, any other poor family, that the kids will understand that the family is struggling. So if someone else is coming saying, hey, I can offer you this job, because that's another recruiting tactic, is they either getting modeling gigs or acting jobs, like it's easy money, and then they use that as a recruitment tactic. And instead of actually having a modeling job, it turns into sex work.
Do you know percentages on that? How often do people get approached with something that seems legit versus just straight getting kidnapped? Do you have any rough figure?
I don't have the actual figure. You'd probably anecdotally, I would say is probably straight kidnapping happens like maybe 5% of the time.
Okay. So the majority of it, they are shisty entrepreneurs who find vulnerable children or vulnerable young, typically women, I imagine, who don't have a lot of money, and they offer them the opportunity to make money, and then it turns into something that they can't leave. Is that
that's one of the
accurate?
That is I don't know what type of pimp that, the Romeo pimp uses romance and relationship and love as a way to recruit their victims. And then there's the model agent or the photographer who recruits people by saying, you have got a great look, you could be a model, here's my card, let's do a photo shoot so you can get modeling work. That's another tactic. For just general human trafficking, for labor trafficking, then it is the promise of work and a job, and then it turns out into not being a legitimate job. And it could, or they will, this happens a lot to immigrants. They'll take their passports and all their paperwork.
Yeah.
And then, because if, I think I might burp.
Go for it.
It's stuck right there. It might come out later.
That's all right.
They will tell these people you will go into debt with us so we can transport you from this country to this country so you can get some work. And they're like, well, you need to pay us back. But then they will charge them for everything. They'll charge them for rent and food and all of that stuff. But the food and housing that they have is not livable. It's just, generally speaking, the people use manipulation and coercion and just outright lies to recruit people.
Yeah, it's like this brutal trick because there are a lot of people who are upset with the level of immigration in this country and other countries. But when you think about it, if you lived in a country where you couldn't make very much money, I mean, you're just scraping by, and you maybe you have a wife and you have some kids, or you want to take care of your grandma. Who wouldn't try to go to a different country to make more money?
There's no one. Like,
that's just what you would do.
Yeah.
And people get chastised for it and exploited and manipulated. And I totally get that. You get this promise of, come with me. You can make 50 times a day what you normally do. And you'll have a place to live, and you'll be here with some people that you know. And then as soon as you get to that other place, maybe you don't speak the language as well. Maybe they steal your passport, and then you're in big trouble.
Yeah. And that's another thing that happens with like mail order brides too. That a lot of it was Raphael House does they're a domestic violence shelter, but they also do preventive education. One of the educations that they provide is in her shoes. And every stories that they use in this are all real stories. And one of them was an Asian woman married an American man, met him. He went over somewhere to Asia, met her, brought her back, married her, but he kept all of her passports and all of her identification. So even though, I mean, it technically, since they're married and he is having sex with her, it is a form of sex trafficking. Ultimately, it's, he's not selling her to other people, but she can't leave because she doesn't have any of her documentation. She doesn't speak the language. If she goes to like the doctors or, any other support, she is like a luck of the draw if there's somebody who actually speaks her language and can translate and find out exactly what's going on. But yeah, you hear about, I mean, it was kind of bigger in the 90s and the early aughts, the mail order bride trope.
Yeah, I mean, you always hear those words, but I don't know that I've ever experienced it. I guess if you had a quote unquote mail order bride, she probably wouldn't be going out much. If she couldn't communicate with people, you would just kind of keep her at home, I guess, and then no one would really know. Yeah. I don't know, it's such a weird concept.
Yeah, but I mean, it's one of the ways that, men who... They're just kind of trash humans, so they can't find women their age who will put up with their shit. But they are, kind of incel. The incel movement now is basically kind of derived from that. Is where men who feel that they are owed a sexual companion, but can't get it from actual real women in their lives will take advantage of a desperate woman in a war-torn country who, again, they don't have the resources. They don't have, homes or income or the food that they need. Everybody's starving. They don't, and they'll bring them over here. And then, that woman doesn't really she doesn't know of her rights. Sure, she doesn't have her documentation. Everything's basically controlled in her life by this person who essentially purchased her. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's weird. I mean, it's got to be way better now than it was a few hundred years ago. I mean, we've advanced in a lot of ways, and we've gotten better at doing certain things, but there's still some horrendous stuff that's happening all the time that you don't really think about.
You don't think about because you don't need to.
Well, it's easy.
It's not in your face, right?
And it's easy to get distracted with everything else that's going on, but there's some crazy stuff happening, and so that's why I'm glad you're here talking about it. If you guys aren't working directly with the survivors, you are offering resources for them to potentially utilize.
So with when I joined the Junior League, our focus was ending the cycle of violence against women and children. And so our community partners were Rosehaven, Raphael House, Bradley Angle for a while, the Children's Book Bank. We provide volunteers for whatever the organization said that they would need volunteers for. So with Rosehaven, I've been doing a delivery run for them from Elephant's Deli to to Rosehaven for, I don't know, like 5-6 years or something like that. Once a week, I go pick up a donation, food donation, and then deliver it to Rosehaven so that they don't have to worry about it. But they also have there's been like birthday parties that the Junior League has done with Rosehaven, and like days where they would go like help give their clients like mani-pedis and stuff like that. And then also, but with the sex trafficking committee, our two biggest things were the Waiting for the Light documentary, and then the Delicates Drive, which was now called the Essentials Drive. So part of it was awareness, but part of it was also to collect necessary items for survivors to have. And then we would then deliver the donations. We split them up amongst the recipients and deliver them to the organization. So Rosehaven would get a donation. Janus Youth used to be a recipient of it. They also work with homeless children. They would get donations. Rehab Sisters is the recipient. Village for One is a recipient. And what we would get, undergarments, socks, and then like toiletry items. Because one of the things that when they were first studying this issue in Portland that led to the documentary was when survivors are rescued, they have to give up their undergarments as evidence. So then they're basically left no underwear, no bra, and having someone control every single aspect of your life. They're the ones choosing what type of underwear you wear, what type of clothes you wear, all of that stuff. And then they don't have, and then also they run out, they don't have toiletry items. They don't have soap, shampoo, any of that. So
they're checking for evidence of sexual partners. Is that why you have to give up your stuff?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, not every John is going to want to use protection.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And do you see things getting better? Are you reaching more people? Do you see this like penetrating more and more people across the area, and you're helping more people as time goes on?
Well, yes and no. I mean, at least the awareness is getting a lot better. People know that this is happening. Granted, there's still a whole lot of misinformation out there, like the whole Pizzagate thing. Like the Democrats are having these huge like sex trafficking rings and stuff like that, or Hollywood elites do. Granted, some Hollywood individuals are kind of in sex trafficking rings, or that is straight kidnapping is how it happened. So like, beware of this brown man who's kind of following this kid in the stroller, and like he was going to kidnap me and then kidnap my child, and yeah, misinformation.
Well, it must be difficult to get people out if they don't realize that something bad is happening, like you said earlier.
It is that it is difficult. And the other aspect of that too is that the trafficker will tell their victims that their family doesn't want them anymore, that because they're doing this, they're dirty and they're evil, and that also that the police will treat them as criminals, which unfortunately that is kind of factual. So they even if they do realize that something is wrong here, or something they do want to get out, like that 16-year-old girl from my school, she wanted to leave, and that was when he said, well, no, you're not going to leave, and if you're going to leave, then you don't get to live anymore. So it is very difficult to do extractions, and there's actually some organizations who their focus is strictly extracting someone from a situation. So, and they do, the National Human Trafficking Hotline ran by Polaris. I forget their full name. Polaris is a nonprofit, and they run the National Human Trafficking Hotline. So you can, if you are suspecting that someone is either possibly being trafficked, or you suspect a company, a business is trafficking their individuals in there, like you find like an illicit massage parlor and you're like, that doesn't seem like they're a licensed masseuse is working there, and like the reviews online are like, yeah, are mostly all dudes, and they talk about like, yeah, happy endings or anything along those lines. Mm-hmm. You can call the human trafficking hotline, give them their information, and then they will contact the authorities in the area, and then the authorities can do more investigations and call an extraction team.
I imagine that the best way to deal with it would be to take out whoever is in charge, but it's probably difficult to do that because maybe they use cash, nothing's documented. How do you prove that somebody is kidnapping or in charge of someone else and keeping them from escaping? How do you prove that?
It's very difficult. Thankfully, when it does come with children, there is no need to prove force, fraud, or coercion because children can't consent. But when it comes to adults, it's a lot more difficult to prove that an individual has been trafficked. And not only that, but since there's, again, so high demand, and generally people, when they talk about legalizing sex work, they're not thinking about the sex workers. They're mainly thinking about the Johns. Let Johns pay for sex. Let them, don't shame them, don't harm them. They're not really thinking about the harm that comes to sex workers, even if they actually choose to work in it, versus you can't tell the difference if the average person isn't going to know the difference between whether someone's being trafficked or they actually choose to work in the industry. And Johns generally don't care. But proving the force, fraud, and coercion does make it difficult to convict traffickers. There was a survivor who came to talk to the Junior League. She had been trafficked as an adult. She met her boyfriend through Plenty of Fish, and he sold her the whole white picket fence, family future, and then he started having her started out with giving massages to his friends, and that turned into actually having sex. And then she ended up having to then recruit other girls to come into his harem. Not harem is not really the correct word.
Sounds like Epstein. Did you ever watch any of those documentaries?
I read some of the articles, but haven't seen any of the actual.
That's what he would do. He would send out Ghislaine Maxwell to get 14, 15-year-old girls and bring them back, and they'd give them massages, and then he'd say, if you bring your friends, it's like a pyramid scheme.
Yeah.
I will give you money, and I will give them money too.
Yeah. It's one of the aspects where, when we get into the criminal justice system, that's even trickier. But anyway, back to this woman. When someone found one of her male friends while he was on these sites, don't know, but he recognized her picture in Backpage, and he notified the authorities. And thankfully, even though in Oregon you can still even arrest a child for prostitution, the officer knew that she wasn't a prostitute. He knew from whatever the signs, he understood what was going on, knew that she was actually being trafficked. Well, when she was finally taking him to court and in court to try and convict him, she was getting death threats from people who didn't believe that he was actually trafficking her. And then, even though he is technically registered as a sex offender, they were still finding him on Plenty of Fish, trying to find another girlfriend. So even going through the whole trial, the same thing when it comes to rape and sexual assault, the conviction rate of getting someone to actually be convicted of rape is just a fraction of the number of individuals who. Yeah,
the way the law is based, it's difficult to prove anyone would do something in that situation. You have to have physical proof, which is difficult to document, especially if you have people who are brainwashed and manipulated and unable to really understand what's happening.
And then, I know that there was a bill in our state legislature a while ago. I didn't make it through, but it was the hearsay law. So if an individual survivor escapes, tells their story to, say, either the police officer or their counselor. When it came to trial, it still required that survivor has to testify against their trafficker. Well, that's another layer of trauma because they have to face their abuser, their trafficker, in court. But the hearsay law would allow the counselor or the police officer who heard the story to testify on behalf of the victim.
Yeah, I get that that's traumatic, but you kind of got to do it, don't you? Because it's your word against theirs.
Right, but if you tell but that's what the hearsay law would allow. It would allow these survivors who aren't at a place where they can face it.
Yeah.
They're still dealing with the original trauma. Can't handle the trauma on top of that. That their testimony will still be heard, but through another authority figure who that told in an authoritative process, like either a police interview or through the counseling, like the counselor can speak on behalf of the survivor. Because that was another thing that made it that does make it difficult to convict these individuals, is that the victims themselves can't testify. They can't bring themselves to face that person in court and tell their story, knowing that the defense lawyer is going to try and tell them that it's all their fault anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a rough spot. What is your opinion or the general opinion on the legalization of sex work and prostitution? Would that help in any way? No?
Not really.
No?
Not really. I mean, because trafficking happens in legal institutions. Technically, strip clubs are legal in Portland, and yet individuals have been trafficked through strip clubs here in Portland. Sex work is legal in not most areas in Nevada. Like, it's not legal in Vegas or like Reno. You have to have like a maximum number of citizenry in the, forget how it's termed, but in the smaller constituency areas, if there's a low enough demographic, then it's legal in those areas. Well, those legal brothels, people are trafficked through those brothels. Can I remember? Rebecca Bender, I think is her last name. I'll have to look that up. She is originally from Grants Pass, Oregon. She was trafficked through Oregon and also trafficked in Nevada. And even there is NCOS, the National Center on Sexual Exploitation. They have a class action lawsuit against the state of Nevada for allowing the violation of the 13th Amendment, just for having sex work legal, because it allows if it's legalized everywhere, it's going to dramatically increase the demand. Well, there isn't going to be enough consenting adults to provide the services that the demand will require.
I think I had this conversation with Chris Carey. It just seems to me, and I could be totally wrong, but it just seems to me that if you're capable of selling your body in every way possible, you sell your body when you go to work. If you work at a Target, you're selling your body, you're selling your time. If you work in the coal mine. No, I'm just saying, I don't know why that should be illegal. It seems like it creates so many other problems. And if we just said, your body's your body, you could sell it in any way you want to, it seems like maybe it would create some other problems, but it would alleviate a bunch of issues we currently have. Well,
it would definitely alleviate the whole idea of an individual being criminalized for the crime committed against them. But do you remember when marijuana was legalized? I
remember when it used to be illegal. Yeah, for sure.
Well, when it was legalized, all of a sudden, everybody was like, people were lining up around the block to these dispensaries to get their pot. And the pot was then, a lot of the demand was greater than the supply.
But you know what it also did? It eliminated a bunch of shitty weed coming in from Mexico that people were selling illegally. Now you can buy it from a store Okay, sorry, keep going.
But legalizing it dramatically increased the demand.
Yes.
So there's that. Now, the difference between legalizing drugs and legalizing sex work is, what is the product in legalizing drugs? The product is
Drugs.
an object.
Okay.
What is the product in sex work? It's a human being. So a person, even though we're legalizing narcotics and marijuana, marijuana is not really a narcotic. If people abuse it, mostly they're just harming themselves. Mm-hmm. The residual harm is to their family and loved ones. I know this from personal experience. My brother did die from an accidental heroin overdose, so I have that lovely experience. But with someone's abusing sex work, they're abusing and harming another human being. And that other human being, high probability, is not a consenting individual. So Cupcake Girls, they're an organization who provides services and support to sex workers, and they don't differentiate between like actual sex workers and sex trafficking survivors. They support them all. But through counseling, they found out that around 80% of their customers had been trafficked. That's 80%. So the vast majority of individuals who are in the commercial sex industry aren't consenting. They're being trafficked. And that's with it being it being illegal to purchase sex.
I just don't know what you do, because there's going to be a demand for it forever. And it seems like you can either restrict it and prosecute people for selling it, or you can just let it be.
This kind of goes across the board when it comes to any kind of labor and work. The power needs to be given to the workers.
Yeah. No, that's what I'm saying.
So you can't just initially just legalize prostitution or legalize sex work just outright, because that's going to cause a lot greater harm. The demand is going to increase. More traffickers are going to do more recruiting. With climate change increasing the vulnerabilities, especially of poor and minority communities, you have more vulnerable people. Is going to increase trafficking. Just outright legalizing it is going to create additional trafficking, because the legitimate supply, will not be able to meet the increase. They can't even meet the demand now, let alone if it's legalized and increased. Mm-hmm. One of the things that we should do, one, is start with the strip clubs and give employment rights and workers' rights to dancers. They don't have those. And in Portland, none of these strippers are employed by the strip clubs. They're all independent contractors. And so by being an independent contractor means you don't get health care, you don't have employees' rights, barely even have workers' rights. Several years ago, there was a bill going through our state legislature that was going to give strippers actual workers' rights, but that didn't make it through either. And that's the other irony part. Even if you choose to work in the sex industry, that automatically increases your vulnerability to being trafficked. Because you can choose to, like, if I wanted to go work at a strip club, I could go through the whole employment process and be hired as an independent contractor. But say I didn't want to dance anymore. There's been instances where managers have threatened the dancers, threatened their lives, threatened the lives of their children if they didn't go up and perform. That's trafficking. There's other instances, like there is a recent, there's also wage theft that happens a lot in strip clubs. I know of one case, it made it to one of the comedy shows that I watch. I don't remember which one. A strip club in Arizona where the strippers were being just absolute wage theft, like being charged astronomically and for I don't know. They dancers have to tip out everybody out of their tips. They have to tip out everybody else. Well, it was kind of the way that they were doing it was astronomically to the point where you would go, oh yeah, that's not reasonable tipping out of the bouncer or the manager. And then there was also the case of a Stars Cabaret out in Beaverton where the manager and the owner knew that some of the dancers were like 15, 16 years old. Mm-hmm. So it's one of those things that if you actually require strip clubs to employ the strippers as employees and then allow them to, if they're going to be having independent contractors, actually force them to adhere to the right, to the qualifications of an independent contractor, which is the independent contractor dictates their pay, dictates their schedule. But that doesn't happen.
Well, how is it different from any other business? How is like Arby's or Target or Fred Meyer or whatever, how are they required to hire employees and not private contractors, but strip clubs can? Or independent contractors? Yeah.
Well,
how does that work?
It's part of it has to do with Portland's artistic expression law. So in Portland, like if you wanted to, you could just walk around the streets naked. As long as it wasn't with the intent to arouse somebody else, it's legal. That's why we have the naked bike ride. Mm. So stripping and, dancing is considered an artistic expression. So it's one of those like little, like they found a glitch in the system that they were able to, they found that loophole and they've exploited it to where they don't hire dancers as employees, they hired as independent contractors. So they don't have to pay any employment taxes. They don't have to pay for anything that you would have to if you were going to hire an employee.
So you're saying this only happens in Portland, Oregon. This doesn't happen in other states?
I'm not familiar with other state laws. I just know that this is how it works in Portland.
Well, yeah, they always say that Portland has more strip clubs per capita than any other. I wonder if that's why.
Could be. Because we have very lax laws when it comes to that. But again, those lax laws aren't benefiting the dancers themselves. It's benefiting the clubs. It's benefiting the managers and the owners of those clubs. But if we, and it should be across the board. We should be giving workers' rights to every single industry because there's exploitation happening everywhere, not just in, when you're talking about, you're selling your body if you're working at Macy's just as much as you're selling your body if you're, working at Dolphins. But it's, at least the employee at Macy's, or if they are able to unionize, like allow the dancers to unionize so that they can, fight for what they actually need and to, if they are, and have it in a way that if they are being abused, that they aren't afraid to report it in case that then they will be arrested.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a power struggle because anybody's capable of starting an OnlyFans or going anywhere and working however they want to. But I get what you're saying. If you get trapped in a scenario where you feel like somebody is in charge of you and they're threatening you, and then you feel like you can't do anything about it, and it's related to your income level and it's related to pressure and manipulation, and that's got to be a rough spot to be in. And like we said earlier, sometimes it's easier just to do what you're doing than to rock the boat. Yeah. But you are doing what you can to offer resources and guidance for people who are attempting to leave that area, right?
Mostly where my focus is on education and awareness. Just doing something like this is letting people know that it happens, how it happens, why it happens, and the more people are aware of it, illicit activity thrives in the dark. If you start shining the light on illicit activity, it can't thrive anymore. If you start telling the truth, more individuals will start realizing on their own, I'm not in a situation where I thought I was. I thought this was what I wanted, but no, I didn't choose to do this. I didn't choose to do that. And yeah, it's just because I've met some survivors, but most of the time it's after when they've actually been willing to tell their own story. And so that's, they've gotten out of it either on their own or through the help of others. They've gone through a lot of their counseling to realize what was happening to them, and they're at the point where they want to tell their stories to again help somebody else realize that they can get out, or help other people realize, no, it can happen to a middle class income family. It can happen to a Christian school student. It can happen to. Yeah, I mean, it happens everywhere.
Well, and we also didn't even discuss substance abuse. How often are these girls getting hooked on something, and then they're guys in charge of whether or not they can get high? It seems like that would happen often.
It does. That's another tactic that traffickers use to keep them. They give them. I mean, most drug dealers would do this anyway. They here's a sample for free, and as soon as they get hooked, well, now you owe me money. Well, in this case, and this was mentioned in that Canadian Reader's Digest article, where these Romeo pimps would start, they'd go to the parties and get their girl to start using heroin or cocaine, and as soon as they're starting to, they're addicted and they want more, oh, well, now you have to pay me. Well, how you're going to pay me is by having sex with my friends. But then also, all addiction is, the source of all addictions is through trauma. So if someone has experienced trauma, they're a lot more likely to start using drugs as a way to escape from their trauma.
Yeah.
So yeah, drug use is high.
Yeah, it's a vicious cycle. For sure. Do the victims that you are aware of and that you have interacted with, do they have the ability to speak with psychologists and other people that can help them with issues of the mind, emotional issues?
Yeah, well, all of the organizations I've already mentioned, they have counselors on staff.
That's cool. That
do support the survivors. So they provide not only the essential, I need this to live, food, clothing. They also provide them counseling services.
Yeah.
And Rosehaven also provides job searching. They have lockers and stuff like that, so people can keep their belongings there safe. They have, internet access, so they can help people look for jobs and that. And I know, A Village for One has the same type of programs for the children in their service, well, even adults, because they provide services up to age 24, 20. They don't, some of them, they don't have an age out, you can age out of the foster system and then you don't have those resources anymore.
Yeah, it's probably 18, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It may have increased to 21 recently or something like that. But for the most part, yeah, 18. Once you turn 18, you're aged out of the foster system. And so you can stay with the foster family that you have if it's a healthy situation. But the government is no longer going to be subsidizing your living costs.
Yeah.
And then I'm sure Rahab Sisters has counseling services too. But they have group meals where everybody can get together and they, provide these women with a sense of community, because that's also very important, whether you're coming off of, out of being trafficked or coming out of addiction too, is community is, and connection is essential to recovery. So they provide these services for them.
And a majority of these people are women, correct? Does it happen with men very often?
On occasion, men are trafficked, but for the most part, it's children, boys and girls, and women.
Yeah.
Men are labor trafficked.
Yeah.
High percentage of men are labor trafficked. But then also children or women can be both sex and labor trafficked.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, it's so gross.
It is.
Using people.
Yeah.
Well, maybe we can talk about anybody that you know that would be willing to talk with me. I can do things anonymously and block their face and even block their name and stuff like that. So I'd be very interested in talking to somebody firsthand if that was possible.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know any survivors personally.
Yeah.
Rebecca Bender, who you have her site up right there. The Rebecca Bender Initiative. She does a lot of talks and does interviews and stuff like that. She'd be a good resource. I mean, like she's from Grants Pass, Oregon. She now lives in Texas. But one of her, the Elevate Academy is another one of her programs, which is an online academy for survivors. And so she might know someone who is in the Portland area, who is part of her program, who'd be willing to talk. And then I can put my feelers out too. I forget her name right now, but she's director of the New Avenues for Youth, A New Day program, and she is a survivor.
Wow.
And she, so the Junior League the Stop Human Trafficking Committee is having our Essentials Drive Summit next Saturday. And she's going to be one of the speakers. I'm one of the speakers too.
Nice.
And then Liz Stark, I think that's her last name, of Rosehaven is also going to be speaking. And so she might be able to reach out to some of their clients at Rosehaven who have been trafficked and would be willing to talk to.
Cool. Yeah, we can talk about that. It's awesome to see that there's a community of institutions that are helping in Portland. Because it's going to take a lot of work. You got a lot of nasty, powerful people fighting you. Yeah,
that's true. Yeah. I mean, the NCOS is another resource for education, for learning, like, how they focus a lot on porn. I don't know. You probably heard of all.
I've heard of porn.
PornHub. Well, no, like
I know about porn.
The legal troubles that PornHub is getting into.
I saw they did a thing on Netflix. I watched 30 minutes of it or so.
Yeah.
They apparently don't filter their videos or don't check to see if they're from people in like compromising situations or underage. Yeah.
I mean, and there's even like, this is another, like, some of the videos too. I mean, I hate porn, but I'm one of those people, I can't hate things if I don't really know anything about it. So yeah, I've watched some porn just to get some like idea of what type of topics out there. And there's like some videos where you see like the individuals interviewed beforehand say, oh yes, I agree to that. And then you watch the video and you can see that their participation enthusiasm diminishes. Mm-hmm. But then basically it goes from, oh yes, I want to experience this, and then you see the actual abuse start happening. It's where they try and protect themselves from being penetrated again, and they're just like, their hands are pushed away, tied back. And so you see that in a lot of these things where like initially you do consent, but then you aren't allowed to withdraw your consent.
Yeah.
And that happens a lot in porn. And then also just like, even though it might be scripted, there's a lot of violence against women in porn. And that without the context, a lot of, especially like young boys who are watching it, they don't have the understanding that what they're watching isn't real, especially if this is one of the scripted ones. This isn't real, but they have this idea that is how women and girls want to be treated when it comes to romantic or sexual relationships.
Well, yeah, and it's a different spot in our timeline that you can go on a computer in your pocket. No matter how old you are, you can go search for anything you want. You can search for people getting their heads blown off. And up until 20 or 30 years ago, you didn't have access to everything like that. And so it's the Wild West right now with anything.
Yeah. And that's like one of the issues that like NCOS and a couple of other advocates are coming across is, Backpage got shut down because the owners of Backpage weren't willing to do the work necessary to actually prevent postings of people who were obviously being trafficked and minors who were obviously being trafficked. OnlyFans was about to shut itself down because they didn't want to put age verification and consent verification on their website. Two simple things where like you have to prove like now you have the technology that you can actually like post up to prove that you're 18. It's not just yes I'm 18. It's no, post a picture of your photo ID to prove that you're 18 in order to view this website. And then for people who are posting videos to actually prove that there was consent of all parties in the video. And that seems to be reasonable if you want to prevent people, sexual abuse material from being online. You have to prove that the people in the video are consenting to it. And then you have a lot of people it's like, oh yeah, they want to shut down OnlyFans because they're opposed to sex workers. Like, no, OnlyFans is wanting to shut themselves down because they don't want to put these two protections in place. And that also is happening like with PornHub and other porn sites where they don't want to put those protections in place, which is proving one, that you are over 18 to view this site, and two, that everybody in this video that you're posting is consenting to what's happening in the video.
Yeah. Yeah, it's weird because you can record anything at any time and not even know you're being recorded.
Yeah.
Then somebody could lie. Somebody could make a fake ID. Somebody could use software to make your voice sound like you. And I mean,
yeah, deepfake and AI is gonna make this aspect of it. I'm like, there's a lot of benefits to AI, but it's gonna help the deepfake stuff.
It's gonna get weird.
Make it a lot easier.
It's gonna get really weird.
It is.
Yeah, and we're like right on the cusp of it, and I don't think anyone really knows what's happening, and it's gonna get crazy.
Yeah, and well, as with everything, the criminals are going to figure it out first.
Yeah, I mean that's the problem with any aspect of life. You cannot foolproof anything. There's always somebody that's going to figure out how to go through the back door.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, it sounds negative, but I think you're putting up a good fight, and there are tons of people in the world who need help, and there are tons of people who don't know that they need help, and they need the opportunity to learn and to educate themselves and get free from whatever is oppressing them. It is a dangerous place, and everybody's experience is different.
Yeah.
And it's based on who your parents were and what your environment was when you grew up and how much money you had and whether or not you got beat up at school. Like, there's so many factors that go into everything. Yeah. And I think people don't realize all the time that every person is extremely different. You can't just cookie cutter something for everyone. It's going to be nuanced for each individual. But
and even when it comes to like fighting it, it's going to be based on each individual. Rebecca Bender actually has a quiz to decide like what area of anti-trafficking is best suited to you, whether it's rescue, recovery, prevention. And actually one of the best ways to prevent this from happening is like having a universal basic income or, universal health care, living wages as minimum wage. Because if you reduce the aspects that create vulnerability in individuals, even like a lot of like, abuse happens because, the parents are struggling financially, and then they're suffering from addictions themselves, but they don't have the resource to actually recover from it in a healthy way. And so that it's just transferred onto the children. So we've actually have things like universal health care, mental health care, addiction recovery, basic, universal basic income and or, living minimum wage, then a lot of these vulnerabilities will disappear.
Yeah, I agree. That is what most people's stress in their life comes from, is the inability to pay for the simple stuff you need. Yeah. And then, if you're stressed out about work, you're stressed out about money, you can't pay your rent, you can't pay your bills, then everybody knows, or not everybody knows, but they should know, when somebody's freaking out on you, when they're honking their horn in traffic, or they're screaming at you, or they get mad at you when you're trying to buy a loaf of bread at the grocery store, it's not because of you. Yeah. It's because of what's happening in their life. And I think most of the time it's directly related to money. And I mean, the answer is not to just give everybody the same amount of money. You have to have some sort of meritocracy where people work for things and are rewarded for what they put in. But yes, there needs to be a base level where you can't have
like the universal basic income is just like, everybody will get like $1,000 a month, which isn't enough to survive if you aren't working in some way or another. So if you have a unskilled job that will pay less than, say, like a lawyer, then they're still going to have like varying levels of income and lifestyles. But at least no one is struggling to survive.
Exactly. Yeah. I agree. There's a lot of things that need to change. I hope we get to see them
I would love to see them
in our lifetimes.
That'd be nice.
Well, I think that's a good spot. I very much appreciate you coming and talking with me and sharing all of that.
Yeah, my pleasure. Yeah.